CES is an all-island, not-for-profit organization that has expertise in research, evaluation, program and change management, as well as implementation. Implementation is about a deliberate and thoughtful process of turning evidence and research into policies or practice. So it is about avoiding kind of haphazard or best practice or best attempts, but using established methodologies to try and put a structure around how things are turned into real life. And by doing that increases the chances of success of the policy or the strategy delivering the outcomes that people expect.
So often stakeholders and commentators will talk about how policy can sit on a shelf, that once it's drafted and goes through that onerous task of getting completion and sign-off from Minister and Assembly or Dáil, that it doesn't actually get implemented. And I think there are a number of reasons for why that is. So firstly, a lot of effort, political will and stakeholder buy-in goes into the actual drafting of the policy, and people really concentrate on what the document says. Less attention is paid to what's going to happen next and how that is going to be taken forward. Increasingly, I think we also recognise that policy can require cross-sectoral, cross-departmental effort, particularly to address intractable issues that we've been grappling with over many years. And that becomes really hard to implement because there are lots of different authorities and mandates and responsibilities that are all coming together, and that requires a particular skill of implementation. I think another real challenge is that we are operating in what is a very political and complex environment. So we operate to electoral cycles, we operate to swinging manifestos and political opinions. We operate in a world where public opinion can come into the fray and change mindsets and thinking on an issue. So therefore, it can be really difficult to get consensus on a policy or strategy, and then that can take away a focus from how that is actually going to be implemented. The evidence suggests that implementation science really helps build intentional planning from the outset to really make a difference, to get the outcomes that are intended. Our experience at CES is that when implementation is built in from the start, it really helps policymakers, practitioners, stakeholders, and even politicians think about how they're going to get to the result that they want. Having that implementation mindset is really critical because it allows us to refine our plans, to think about what fits with the context, what's feasible for us to deliver, what capacity do we have to make that happen, what evidence is there that what we're planning to do will actually make a difference, and how will we know that we've got the results. So all of those things combine to allow us to really think about implementing effectively and making sure that we get that strategy or policy off the shelf and making a difference in people's lives. So when we look at what evidence there is around about effective implementation of policy, what that tells us is that implementation can help focus minds on the outcomes that we want to achieve and the difference that we're making in people's lives. It can help us really think about the range of factors that we need to coordinate and bring together in order to make that change. And very importantly, it can help us plan and think about what indicators there will be that we're on the right track, and what difference, how we can measure the difference that we're making in people's lives. So often in policy and strategy, the outcomes that we are seeking are quite transformational and long term. It can take a while for us to really see the difference on the ground in local communities. But particularly by measuring implementation, we can see evidence that we're on the right track, we're getting there, and that can give policymakers and stakeholders some assurance that we're heading in the right direction to hold course, or indeed if we need to adjust course, that we're doing so in the right way. So it gives a little bit more rigor and I suppose evidence into the implementation process, which is well worth doing. So the GOAL programme was a very significant all-island initiative with government departments in Ireland and Northern Ireland that saw the design and implementation of 9 reform projects across 6 departments in Ireland and Northern Ireland, accompanied by a very distinctive and unusual learning, evaluation and dissemination programme that really helped to shift thinking about the reform and transformation of the public sector in Northern Ireland. It was robustly evaluated by the Institute for Public Administration together with Queen's University and the Institute for Government. And one of the key learnings from that programme was that leadership can make a huge difference to the implementation of a reform initiative or a new policy or strategy. We found that where leaders were prepared to distribute leadership within their organisation, and where they paid attention to the implementation of a new policy or strategy or programme, that made a huge difference. Firstly, it spread that implementation mindset across the organisation. Secondly, it also allowed for removal of barriers to implementation, and it increased the number of enablers, so that the policymaker or public servant who was taking forward responsibility for implementation found their path was just a little bit easier because the leader in their organisation was paying attention and really committed to the change. So in one project that we're taking forward at the moment is a partnership with the University of Limerick and Queen's University called Stable Lives, Safer Streets. And in that programme, we are particularly looking at how policy gets implemented. It's quite a groundbreaking research project because it's looking at implementation of policy across the civil service across the island. And we are interviewing civil servants. We're undertaking a number of evidence reviews. We're looking at the findings from the broader Stable Lives, Safer Street project. And we're pulling all of that material together to provide a resource for the implementation of policy going forward. So when we've been out talking to civil servants, one of the things that has emerged in the findings is that civil servants are not clear about what their role in the implementation of policy is. So some see their role as finishing with the launch of a strategy or policy, whereas others believe that they have a responsibility to help plan for and enable the implementation of that policy or strategy. So one key thing that I think civil servants and public servants could do is to get really clear about what they believe their responsibility for implementation is. At the beginning of a policy making process or strategy making process, civil servants should be asking themselves, what is my responsibility for the implementation of policy? They should be asking that of key stakeholders, colleagues, minister. And once that is clear, they should be planning for that from the very beginning, because that is a key thing that we have found across all our work. Implementation begins not when the strategy or policy is finished, but at the very beginning. Considering implementation from the start allows for an end product that is fit for purpose, that is feasible, that the system has capacity to implement, and that is really embedded in evidence, and therefore is much more likely to make a difference in our community, which is what we're all working towards.